You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. We are a week into the anniversary of the pandemic's arrival and the beginning of lockdown in the United States. So in this episode, we're going to look at that and what it really means now that the politicking abuse of science is largely, though not completely, out of the way, now that the vaccines are here, and now that we face a new set of challenges, and we damn well better grow up and face them. Also, we have a special report on how the vaccines vary in women's responses to them, as opposed to the responses of men. My guest today is Linda Goler Blount, President and CEO of the Black Women's Health Imperative, here to update us on the double and triple multiple crises that Black women are facing regarding health in general and the pandemic in particular. And, of course, there'll be fighting words at the end of the program addressing where we go from here and how, what the future will bring. And that's actually encouraging. Before we start, I have to give a tip of the hat and a hooray to Deb Haaland, who has just been confirmed by the Senate as the first Native American Interior Secretary of the Interior, a Native American in charge of the land. Oh, wow, it's about time. If you want to hear Deb, who has been a guest on this program, she was a guest in episode 246 in April 2017, and she was a wonderful guest. I'm so pleased and proud of her. Let there be trumpets on the rooftop. Meanwhile, before we get started on any of what we've got ahead of us, yep, you know, we need to go inside the headlines. It's been a year since we entered the first lockdown. And what a year it's been. I imagine that you're both thirsty for real news about COVID-19 and at the same time sick to death of hearing about it. Well, perhaps we can approach it in a different way. There's no denying the staggering loss of more than 500,000 lives, well over 500,000 in the United States alone. Nor is there any denying the frightening trends we've noticed in terms of the pandemic's effect on women, and especially women of color. More than 5.4 million women have left the workforce due to layoffs or due to the mind-bending, back-breaking challenge of kids being home from school. At the same time, millions of girls were taken out of schools worldwide. And, as Marianne Schnall reported on CNN, 47 million more women were pushed into extreme poverty due to the economic fallout. That's according to estimates from the United Nations. Nor is it over yet, despite the somewhat suicidal efforts by certain states. Yeah, I'm talking about you, Texas, and you, Oklahoma, and you, Mississippi, where Republicans are leading those states, to act as if it were done with entirely. That's it, no more virus. Over the past month, the death toll in the United States has risen regularly by approximately 2,000 to 3,000 per day. But with numbers that large, what goes missing is the heart-blistering individual loss. Perhaps we can borrow a leaf from Joe Pinsker, writing in The Atlantic in late January. He noted that people might be less numb to the death toll if it were scaled down to a more human level. So here goes, with 4 examples. On average, each person in the United States who's died from COVID-19 is deprived of about 13 years of life. This estimate, compiled by Harvard's Stephen Elledge, compares the age at which people died from COVID with how long they likely would have lived according to Social Security Administration projections. When people talk about death from COVID, they say, well, they were old and were going to die anyway, Elledge says. But people don't appreciate the fact that even if you're 70 or 75, you might still have 10 to 15 years of life left. Nor do they appreciate, with the deaths of younger people, that it's a huge loss of life, sometimes 40 years. 2. For the first time since World War I, U.S. life expectancy at birth could drop by a full year. This means that the pandemic has temporarily canceled out all gains made against all other causes of death during the past 15 years. 3. About 1 in 800 Black Americans has died from COVID, while 1 in 1,325 white Americans has. Indigenous Americans have been hit the hardest, with 1 out of 750 people dead. For Pacific Islanders, the rate is 1 in 1,100. For the Latinx community, 1 in 1,150, and for Asian Americans, 1 in 1,925. But in a way, these numbers understate the gaps between white Americans and those of other racial groups because older people are more likely than younger ones to die from COVID, and a larger percentage of white Americans are older compared with other racial groups. And 4, roughly 3.1 million Americans have lost a close relative to COVID-19. And about 50,000 to 70,000 people in their 60s and 70s have lost a spouse to the disease. These estimates come from a model of kinship networks in the United States that Ashton Verdery, a sociologist at Penn State, developed using models to develop what he calls a bereavement multiplier. At any given time, the number of mourners is roughly 9 times the cumulative number of people who've died. But the multiplier does not include extended family members, step-parents, step-children, long-term cohabiting partners, adopted family members, or friends, which means that the number of people who lost someone close to them is larger still. Those are some of the tragic basics. Many, if not most, of those deaths could have been avoided had this country had even a minimally decent, empathetic government instead of the blatant, cynical, deathly policies and inefficient ones of Donald Trump and his associates. But not to dwell too much on what's happened already, because that way lies madness. Instead, let's have a look at where we are. Where we are is better. Not only because Trump is gone and Biden is here with some sensible policies that are racing to keep up with the pandemic and managing to do so, but also because there's an air of possibility opening up, and it's not just spring in the air. So it's time to really look at the vaccines and their effect. It's vital to notice that women and men respond differently to many kinds of vaccines, doubtless because of a mix of factors, including hormones, genes, and dosing. In a study published just last month, researchers from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention analyzed safety data from the first 13.7 million COVID-19 vaccine doses given to Americans. Among the side effects reported to the agency, 79.1% came from women, even though only 61.2% of the vaccines had been administered to women. Nearly all of the very rare anaphylactic reactions to COVID vaccines have occurred among women, too. According to Sabra Klein, a microbiologist and immunologist at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, this sex difference is consistent with past reports of other vaccines. In general, women have more reactions to the variety of vaccines. That includes influenza vaccines given to adults, as well as some given in infancy, such as the hepatitis B and MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines. But the news improves for women. Side effects are usually mild, short-lived, and the physical reactions are signs that the vaccine is working, that, quote, you are mounting a very robust immune response, and you will likely be protected as a result, Dr. Klein says. The answer to the sex difference reaction also could be behavioral. Women are more likely than men to report side effects even when the symptoms are the same as men's. And men are less likely than women to see doctors when they're sick, so they may also be less likely to report side effects. Nevertheless, biology does play an important role. The female immune response is distinct in many ways from the male. Research shows that compared with their male counterparts, women and girls produce more, sometimes twice as many, infection-fighting antibodies in response to the vaccines for influenza, MMR, yellow fever, rabies, and hepatitis A and B. They frequently mount stronger responses from T cells, too. These differences are often much more robust among younger adults, which suggests a biological effect possibly associated with reproductive hormones. Sex hormones, including estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, can cause immune cells to produce more antibodies. The flu vaccine tends to be less protective in men with lots of testosterone compared with men with less of the sex hormone. Among other things, testosterone suppresses the body's production of immune chemicals known as cytokines. Genetic differences may also influence immunity. Many immune-related genes are on the X chromosome, of which women have 2 copies and men only 1. But research now shows that 15% of genes escape inactivation and are more highly expressed in women. These robust immune responses also help to explain why 80%, 80, of autoimmune diseases affect women. Dr. Klein says women have a greater immunity, whether it's to ourselves, to a vaccine antigen, or to a virus. Last, the size of a vaccine dose may also be important, since women absorb and metabolize drugs differently than men, often needing lower doses for the same effects. Until the 1990s, drug and vaccine clinical trials have largely and deplorably excluded women. Trials today do include women, well, most do, but in the trials for the new COVID vaccines, because they were so rushed, side effects were not sufficiently separated and analyzed by sex, and they did not test whether lower doses might be just as effective for women but cause fewer side effects. So here's the bottom line. Unless, for some reason, your doctor severely advises otherwise, get that vaccine dose or those doses. It's crucial. And also, don't change your behavior. Remember to social distance, remember to wash your hands, and most of all, remember to mask. We have to take a short break here, but we'll be back in just a moment with Linda Goler Blount, who is the president and CEO of the Black Women's Health Imperative, and who has some imperative things to tell us about this nation's health, the entire nation, going forward. So stay with us. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
The Black Women's Health Imperative was originally founded in 1984 in Atlanta, Georgia, calling itself the National Black Women's Health Project, and being begun by Billie Avery and a group of her sister activists. Linda Goler Blount joined the Black Women's Health Imperative as the president and CEO in February of 2014. Previously, she served as the Vice President of Programmatic Impact for the United Way of Greater Atlanta, where she led the effort to eliminate inequalities in health, income, education, and housing through place and population-based work. Previously to that, she was the first ever National Vice President of Health Disparities at the American Cancer Society. With more than 25 years of experience in the public, for-profit, and nonprofit sectors, she's had a distinguished career that includes successful tenures at the Coca-Cola Company, leading strategic business initiatives, and also at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as an expert scientist. She also has extensive international health expertise and has served as a consultant to government ministries in Germany, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago, where she lived for 4 years. Here is Linda Goler Blount. Linda Goler Blount, welcome to Women's Media Center Live. It's very good to have you here.
Well, thank you so much, Robin. It's great to be here.
Thank you, ma'am. Let's plunge right in with the current imperative that's facing Black women's health imperative, which is the completely understandable reluctance of some people in the Black community to get the vaccine against COVID, and the history behind that, and what we're doing, what we can do as a nation to get around that. You take the ball and go.
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's really sort of a couple of things right now. We're early still in the vaccination process, and so we're not seeing hesitancy as really the driving issue for the rates being what they are right now.
Yeah.
Those Black people who want to get vaccinated are trying, but there are actually a number of barriers. For example, I don't know if you've tried to negotiate a vaccine website yet.
Oh, yes, yes.
It can be tough.
I just had my second shot yesterday. Yeah, I took all this time.
Oh, well, good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you.
But I'm a white girl,
But
so that's easier for me.
Yeah, well, yeah. But you go to a site and, you have to kind of keep refreshing, or there's no appointment, so you have to go to the next site and the next site. Well,
right.
So that requires that you have internet access and preferably broadband, but it also requires that you have time.
Uh-huh.
And Robin, if you're a low-wage woman, trying to earn
damn right
to support your family, you don't have time to spend hours in front of a computer, nor do you have time to spend hours on the phone on hold, waiting to get through to someone who can help you schedule an appointment.
Right.
So what we're seeing is Black women are trying, but they don't have access. And there's also when and where vaccines are available.
Yeah.
During work hours. Well, if you happen to work between 9 and 5, it's tough to get time off from work.
Right.
Even if you can get an appointment, depending on the kind of job you have to make that appointment. And it may require a car. You may have to drive someplace. What if you don't have a car?
Sure.
So we need to make vaccines available, of course, but accessible, because not everybody works 9 to 5. Not everybody can get time off from work, have childcare, do the other things that need to be done in order to be able to take advantage of the vaccine. But having said that, there is still an incredible amount of misinformation. Early on, there were on social media people talking about don't take the vaccine. You'll get COVID-19, or it'll make you sick in some other way, or give you some other disease, or it's a plot against Black people. We know these things are not true. But one of the things,
but they have happened in the past. They have happened in the past.
Well, sure,
historically.
Sure. Yeah. And because of the perception that the vaccine was developed quickly. I mean, yes, it was developed quickly, but we in science have been studying vaccines for coronaviruses for a long time. So this didn't just happen last year. However, in the Black community, medical mistrust is warranted because for hundreds of years, they've been subjected to experimentation, going back to, J. Marion Sims.
I was just going to mention him. Yep.
Right. Then, even Black people who weren't alive in the 60s and 70s can tell you about Tuskegee and the terrible abuses that happened. They'll talk about Henrietta Lacks. So it's in the lore, and people are right to be concerned, to have questions, and to not necessarily accept as given that this is something good for them. Plus, which last year you'll remember, therapeutics. There was dexamethasone, which was proven to be effective in people with severe COVID-19 disease, but not so for Black people.
Yep.
Well, there were no Black people in the clinical trials. So this medical mistrust is warranted.
Yeah.
But what I'm concerned about is when we get past this point of folks wanting to come out and get vaccinated, so maybe, I don't know, June or so, then we may see the hesitancy, because you've got the early adopters now, and that's maybe 30% of the Black population, and then you've got everybody else who's got to think about it, be informed with facts, be educated, and then make the decision to get vaccinated. And that's where we will need efforts like what the Black Women's Health Imperative are doing, and others, to make sure that people have the best information so that they can make the best decisions for themselves and their families.
Wow, you got your work cut out for you. I sometimes think that only possibly Michelle Obama would be the one trustable voice for Black women for any woman for that matter, get that vaccine. But I've had this private fantasy. It's hopeless, of course, but why not have a hopeless fantasy based on the Dinah Ramsey Ramey Berry book that I'd read some time ago, which people should get and read if you haven't. It'll make your hair stand straight up on your head, called The Price for Their Pound of Flesh, which details how Dr. Sims experimented on living unanesthetized enslaved women to discover what he knew to become the very famous, quote, father of gynecology. And my fantasy is that there's a 10% tax on all fees ever paid to gynecologists that goes toward Black women in reparations. We neither you nor I should hold our breath about that, but it's something to think about because that
it is, especially when you think about where we are in medicine because of what happened.
Exactly.
Because of the suffering of these slave women. Yeah. Exactly.
Every medical advancement. So anyway, that's just a little throw aside. The situation that you described today in terms of COVID, of course, comes in context. And the context is that African American women are more likely than any other group of women in any other ethnic or racial group to have health problems. And they're related to poverty diseases. They're related to adverse birth outcomes that are staggering, maternal health. They're related to lower income and less education, since the higher of both of those are shown to correlate with better health. And it's the same. It's the same thing that's behind suppression of votes. It's institutionalized racism. I think, what is it? African American women have experienced a risk that's 4 times greater regarding death from pregnancy complications.
Yeah. Maternal death rates are 4 times that of white women. Yeah.
I mean, that's like in the Middle Ages, Linda. We've just jumped back 5 centuries.
So it is, and it's unnecessary. I mean,
totally.
We, of course, know this. We in my field, epidemiologists, we have to do a better job of talking about data and race and gender. Yeah. But we talk about this. There's this term, social determinants of health, which I know you're familiar with, and we talk about that as if that explains everything. Oh, well, it's lack of housing or transportation or food deserts or whatever any one of these social determinants might be. But rarely do epidemiologists or public health professionals or, frankly, medical professionals ask the question, well, why do the social determinants exist in the first place? And that is why we see what we see. It is the historical racial oppression that has denied access to Black women through basic health care. I mean, and a great example is breast cancer. In 1981, Black and white women had the same breast cancer mortality rate. Then suddenly things changed. And what happened is in 1982, we learned how to detect breast cancer and we learned how to treat it. And so the 42% difference in mortality rates that we see today between Black women and white women reflects who got access and who didn't.
Now, that's an in-your-face statistic. I mean, those are numbers. They don't lie. I mean, of course, except if you're Trump. But but they don't lie. They're right in your face. How can that not be acted on? And is that just a terminally naive question?
Well, I wish I had the answer, but what we've seen, how come? Because to act on that, Robin, means to challenge white supremacy. It means to challenge the status quo. It means to challenge the power that certain people enjoy and others don't.
That's right.
And there hasn't been, as you have seen, in the last 400 years, much appetite to challenge that power.
No. Tell us what the Black Women's Health Imperative is doing specifically now. I know it has 4 areas, at least, of focus in this, how to put it, window. Last year, there were more white people marching for change in the streets. You're beginning to see a tiny ripple. Every time there has been a step forward, there's been a step and a half back, or maybe it's a step and a half forward and a step back, but it ain't what you'd call galloping progress. So how do we best take advantage of this window and push with everything that we've got to make such statistics as the breast cancer one just leap off the page and into people's hearts and minds and actions?
Well, I'm hopeful as you are that this is the time. Now is the time. You mentioned our 4 areas we're focused, obviously, on maternal mortality and reducing the unnecessary deaths, as we are with chronic diseases, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, HIV prevention, and then, of course, just overall reproductive justice. And what we're doing now is, since there is data, and this is something that a lot of people don't know, we can go back 30 years, and there's data that connects the experiences of racial and gender discrimination and diseases and adverse health outcomes, like uterine fibroid tumors, excessive bleeding, low birth weight babies, maternal mortality, but also biologic changes, inflammatory response, and metabolic response. We know that something like 30% of the reason of the cause for obesity is racially or gender mediated stress.
Wow.
So we've got the data.
Yeah.
Nobody's acted on it, to your point. So our focus now, as it has been for quite some time, is to talk about the data, make the data, we say, come alive, explain it in a way that people can understand it and act on it. And then use that data to inform our program work, but most importantly, to go after those policies that can promote health and those policies that can eliminate barriers. And so we have to make it very clear the role of racism and health, the role of gender discrimination and health, but also broadly the role of racism in what's happening in society. And so we are this spring launching a massive anti-racism efforts that looks at the cost of racism. And our hypothesis is if we could eliminate it today, that probably would mean something like a 30% pay increase for everybody.
My God, that's brilliant.
Maybe 20% earnings per share for corporations if we didn't have these systems of institutional discrimination. And so we are setting about making sure that people understand the cost of racism and then what can be done both at the community level, but importantly at the state and national level as well.
Wow, that sounds brilliant, that campaign. Tell us how people can, the website, or how people can sign on to that or support it or in some way become involved.
Absolutely. So if our website is bwhi.org, so there you can go there, sign up to get our newsletter, and we'll keep you up to date on the development on that project. But at a certain point, we're going to be inviting sort of public comment and public participation. And so that, sign up and get those emails, and then go to coronavirus.bwhi.org, download our pandemic guide, tools, resources, information for just sort of navigating this incredible time we're in right now, but also to help with just managing. The thing that I just want to make sure that I point out is the number one health issue for Black women is actually stress.
Uh-huh.
And so we've been really focused and intentional about trying to give Black women tools and resources and information to lower stress, manage stress, not be overwhelmed by all of this that's going on. Because even if we can get to sufficient vaccination rates that we can really get back to whatever normal is going to look like, this experience, this trauma of the last year is going to be with us for some time.
Sure.
And so we're going to we'll need resources and tools to deal with this for quite some time, while we are doing the policy work that we hope will prevent something like this from ever happening again.
Linda, it's brilliant work that you're doing and have done for some time, going all the way back to the founder, Billy Avery, in my long lost youth. But this today is just splendid work. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for the work that you do and you continue to do. And I'm very grateful that you were with us on Women's Media Center Live today.
Well, thank you so much, Robin, for this opportunity to have a conversation and to meet yet another fan of Billy Avery.
You bet.
I really appreciate it.
We have to take a final break here, but I'll be back in just a moment with some encouraging fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Predictions can be fighting words. In looking back through the logs of this podcast, I realized that I first mentioned the coronavirus in January 26th of 2020. And by March 1st, this program was off and running hard on the subject. And we also were surmising that we would not be done with it as summarily as almost everyone was predicting. So many twists and turns and miseries later, we now are actually at a situation where we can at least imagine, if not seriously consider, where do we go from here? The past is prologue, because history has a lot to teach us. I'm glad to recommend two books here. One is Frank Snowden's impressive Epidemics and Society, From the Black Death to the Present. And the other is Plagues and the Paradox of Progress by Thomas J. Bolecki. Interestingly, neither book prophesies what most people apparently seem to think today, that life will go back to approximating whatever normal was. Give that one up right now. That ain't gonna happen. Certainly not the way we imagine it, and most probably nowhere near the scale on which we imagine it. We think about working more from home, or job changes, maybe even career changes, or possibly residence moves, and we consider that big thinking. We imagine our shopping habits shifting more online and toward deliveries. We know the restaurant business will change. We look at the runaway success of companies like Amazon and Zoom, and some people do think about major shifts in entire industries. But that, too, doesn't think nearly big enough in the long run or even in the short run. We lack a grasp of just how much pestilence, plagues, and pandemics have had on history, our history. Thucydides describes the plague in the second year of the Peloponnesian War that arrived in the port of Piraeus via Egypt and Libya, killing more than a quarter of the army and innumerable residents, and leaving Athens in unprecedented lawlessness. In 541 CE, Common Era, the plague of Justinian, now believed to be bubonic plague, spread along maritime supply lines into Constantinople, ravaging the Mediterranean world in 18 waves, with an average of one epidemic every 12 years. By the end of the 7th century, the recurrent attacks had cut the population by more than half and hastened the collapse of the Byzantine Empire. When the same disease arrived in China's seaports in 610, the weakened Tang dynasty lost control over the Silk Road, and trade between Europe and Asia virtually vanished. The Black Death depleted Europe of fully a third of its entire population over 7 years in the 1330s, returning intermittently and lethally, so that the continent's population did not fully recover for nearly 300 years. Feudalism dissolved. Too many people had perished to subsist on the huge estates of great lords. So the peasants drifted off to discover gradually that they could earn their own small livings in towns and in cities, cobbling shoes, making barrels, being blacksmiths, hiring themselves out as carpenters, workers, carters. Out of their labor and such emerging groups, which eventually became guilds, grew Europe's middle class. Such massive, seismic, historical changes, my friends, that is thinking really big. We rarely stop to question the origins of different engines of progress, but many, if not most of them, followed in the wakes of various plagues and pandemics. Will there be something replacing what we know as capitalism? When society is shaken to its core, even leveled, desperation can become inspiration, and creative thinking gets an ironic boost. The concept of quarantine was devised in Venice after pestilence. The germ theory of disease itself was just such a result. In the early 19th century, the prevailing view had been that the disease stemmed from the loose morals of its sufferers and from poisonous gases emanating from dirty environments in standing water, and you can imagine the grief and suffering that those two wild diagnoses provoked. Then, physician John Snow's 1854 study identifying a water pump on London's Broad Street as the source of contaminated water that spread cholera, blasted through such superstition. Subsequent discoveries by Robert Koch, Joseph Lister, and Louis Pasteur provided the scientific basis for that observation, establishing microbes, not bad smells or poor morals, as disease agents. Collectively, these discoveries in turn established the new fields of epidemiology and microbiology and led to identifying the diseases and the causative microorganisms for tuberculosis, cholera, typhoid, and other infectious illnesses. Perhaps even more importantly, germ theory contributed to the emergence of public health systems to put such scientific ideas into practice for the public good. The historian Mark Harrison has argued that infectious diseases even created the conditions in which the modern state and machinery of government emerged. The types of measures undertaken, quarantine, vaccination, housing reforms, sanitation, and safe water systems, all of these forced governments to wrestle with a difficult balance in social regulation, one between ensuring public good and respecting individual rights. Consequently, that struggle set the precedent for other forms of social regulation, such as compulsory schooling, improved public administration, and investment in urban infrastructure. By the start of the 20th century, there were nearly 1,700 public water systems in the United States, and city governments spent more on them than the federal government voted for anything other than the Postal Service and the military. Would that this had still held true for Flint, Michigan. Certainly, pandemics have caused panic, havoc, and death, and have even been hideously weaponized. As noted before on this program, within 200 years of first contact, 3/4 of the native populations of the Americas had disappeared, mostly as a result of infectious disease. Historian William McNeill identified smallpox and measles as the reasons why, in 1521, Cortez, with fewer than 600 men, was able to conquer the Aztec Empire, which numbered in the millions. Certainly, conditions of poverty, lack of sanitation, and lack of medical services, as well as a citizenry's ignorance, all these ingredients contribute to and foster epidemics. Certainly, particular diseases, tuberculosis, for example, have been romanticized into 19th century wasting disease mythic proportions, while others, like cholera, with its nonstop diarrhea, vomiting, and dehydration, or smallpox, have notoriously suffered the opposite fate. Pandemics are more than what we make of them, but so are their outcomes. After a cholera outbreak in New York City in 1866, the city established the Metropolitan Board of Health, and that was followed by similar acts in Chicago, Milwaukee, Boston, and other large U.S. cities. Among the first duties undertaken by these new urban public health boards was banning roaming pigs and goats and forcing property owners to connect to the new waterworks and sewers being built. A domino effect began. Boards of health changed housing laws, which necessitated street cleaning. That, in turn, required significant financing, which then required long-term loans and bonds, changing the financial system. This was followed with urban investments like intercity railways, ports, highways, canals, and trolleys. Building all this necessitated better education. The above-mentioned ignorance and superstition always resurrects itself in plague time in the form of blaming, fill in the blank, refugees, immigrants, foreigners, Jews, Catholics, midwives. Always a big mistake, midwives, because then you also demonize cats. They're so-called familiars if they're witches. And the cats are killed by the hundreds, so they cannot catch rats, which spread bubonic plague. Anyway, blaming whomever for bringing in the disease when, one, usually it's a disease that's been there all along, and two, what does that matter? Today, immigrants and also Asian American citizens and women are bearing the brunt of the persecution in the United States. We've seen this most recently and horrifically in the murders of Asian American women in Georgia, a domestic terrorist set of murders mixing misogyny and racism and proving yet again that male white supremacist domestic terrorism is America's current greatest threat and has been for some time. And always in such times, versions of what we now see as the QAnon phenomenon resurrects itself. Belief in conspiracies, paranoid terror of the other, nativism, any form of hatred fear can lay its claws on. We can't know what shapes the future will decide to arrive in. This we know and already are acting on, however. We know we sure as hell better start thinking now so we can have a voice, because we must have a voice in determining what shapes the future takes and how those shapes get formed. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at @TheRobinMorgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor Regina K. Scully, WMC president and co-executive producer of this program Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.